I would now like to welcome all the presenters up here. We have another 20 minutes before the seminar ends. And if you are starting to feel tired in the audience, this is nothing compared to multilateral environmental negotiations. You know, they go on, you know, in the early mornings, etc. So this is just to get you to get the feel for it. Endurance and how perceptive are you after 2 hours? Imagine then after negotiating for 8 hours, talking about tactics, right? All night. So now let's see, how are we with microphones here? Yes, I think we need one for the audience, because I would like us to now reflect a bit. What does that mean for the scientific community? As an individual scientist, or could be scientific institutions or departments, etc. How can we act and how should we act in this, as Kerstin, you put it very well, this shrinking space. I think we could start with one or two questions, if there are any. And then we can let our distinguished panelists reflect, and you can also ask questions to each other. Anyone, and this is also open for you as students to challenge these old people like us. I mean, are we really moving forward with these panels? Shouldn't we do more, or yeah, whatever you can come up. Anyone? I see one person in the audience here.
Hi, Marlene Olsson. I would like to hear from maybe IPCC and IPBES about the use of consensus, and whether you, because as I understand it, consensus is what it's the first go-to, but is there also a possibility to go for a majority vote? And has that ever happened, and how is that used in those processes? Like, because we see that that's a problem here with the plastic treaty and the SPP development.
Well, thank you, Marlene. Before we answer that, there was a question here also.
Yeah, I had a question for Bethany, talking about skill sets for scientists to participate in such negotiations. What would you recommend are kind of like the preconditions for someone to be, who might be working in this later, and how could you learn them?
Thank you very much. I don't see any more raised hands, and I could not, unfortunately, see anything in the chat from participants there, but maybe, Tingha, you can... yeah, now I see a comment at least. But, okay, so let's start with these two questions. I don't know who wants to go first. Marie, perhaps?
Yes. Yeah, it's a challenge with the consensus, and we have... IPBES has taken, as I said, much of the structure and how it works from IPCC, so I hope Delian can fill in. It has happened that it's not a vote, but when it comes to kind of final plenary, when there's a structure with working groups where kind of all the negotiation is done, and it comes to the joint plenary when it comes just should be running through when everybody think they have agreed. But sometimes happen that some countries, for political reasons, say, well, we call it West Sahara, not So there might be notes in the kind of in the agreements that this was just the comment coming in. But these are minor things. What happened in the last plenary that really made me think about we need to handle the consensus was a lot of reading on rules and procedures because of this. The countries really blocked. They found the tactics, how to block these decisions because of the consensus. And there was in the IPBES rules and procedures that they could other ways of deciding if it's a technical issue or it was a kind of about the content. But But those countries, when it came in very late stage, say no, since it has been the consensus tradition before, it's too late to bring in other ways of doing it. But I think well, at least the EU group agreed on that the needs to find ways of handling for the coming plenaries, so this block is not there. But careful read in beforehand about the rules and procedures, but maybe also open up for change. But open up to change in agreed rules and procedures, that might not be the best way forward. So I guess that's my answer. Deliang.
Thank you. Deliang, do you want to add around that, around voting procedures and so on? You are muted. Deliang, I think you're muted. So.
Yes, sorry. So this is a very important question, and so what we talk about here are two different groups. One is among the scientists who are doing the assessments. It can be also disagreement, and what we do is that typically the CLA will then have extended discussion on the points that people don't agree. Then we quite easily come up with agreement, because scientists are trained to kind of show the facts, and also, and I think that's why I think the IPCC is a calibrated language, and then we just put all the facts, literatures into that framework, then we can easily agree. So this part is easy. More difficult is in the plenary, as Marie was talking about, when the politicians, the government delegates were involved. And that is really a test for the skill of the chairman or chairwoman. I have seen some really skillful people, and typically what they do is that they try to identify, is this real disagreement, or is just there's some difficulty in really different opinions. So then they will make a decision quite often. They will say, they'll take a break of the whole meeting. Say, okay, we see some disagreement here, let's take a pause. And then he will say, okay, 3 countries will not agree with it, can we have you? And then maybe with 2 more countries together with a small meeting, group meeting. And then they will report back. And sometimes it can take 2 hours, sometimes very quick, and some like maybe 20 minutes. And this group typically can really talk to each other, and then most of the time still can agree, find a compromise quite often.
Okay, thank you, Deliang. I think Martin had a follow-up questions related to that before we let Bethany in on the skill set.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Deliang. But that is exactly what we have seen a lot, and this has not worked. So we are at the end of that process, that forming small groups and trying to find agreements in the discussions about the panel. So this morning we checked the rules of procedure of UNEA. And we found that the default in the rules of procedure of UNEA is voting. Marie, you mentioned tradition of consensus, but where does this come from? We don't see the reason behind that, and we see it's very detrimental and counterproductive. And again, the main rule of procedure in the UNEA is voting.
So Martin, please, UNEA, what is that?
UNEA is the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is the body that's the highest UN body on environmental issues and management and decision making. And under the UNEA, all these processes take place.
Yeah, when I was referring to that was the tradition within IPBES, so not further away. So that's when it was late stage to say we cannot kind of change the formal rules now. But yeah, I haven't digged into it, but I know there are a number of, I think it's political science mainly that they kind of dug into this, how those negotiations are made, and they say that it's really a problem with the apolitical stand in these ones, so it should be better to clarify the different opinions. Now there will be other tactics coming up there, but there are scientific literature that have dug into this problem and have suggested what to do to it. So I guess I can send you some reference where you can find the answers, also critically discussions on it.
And also, Martin, I have to add that what I was referring to is also just IPCC. So I'm not talking about something else. And also quite often it resolves, the issue is resolved. By the way, the chairman will say, okay, I see you don't really agree. And then can we do like that? For this statement, we have a footnote saying that country A does not agree with that.
Okay.
And, when the chairman said that, quite often I see other cases I have seen, the country A will say, okay, we agree. Because they don't want to be listed as a country which is blocking this.
I would like to hear also Kerstin on this point, because you have experience also from the Stockholm and Rotterdam. Are the same procedures there, or do you see any ways around this, or is it this trying to get at the consensus through footnotes and things like that, or how do you, please?
Thank you, and of course we know that the voting procedures are usually the ones that are left quite to the last minute, or are even left in brackets for some of our processes. The problem I see with the voting, especially in the geopolitical situation we're now, is that and you can see you have seen it for some time now, that even if processes allow for voting, there is a certain there is much hesitancy of actually putting it into effect, because it will then snowball into other problems. So even if you have it as an option, countries, and especially those delegates on the podium, will try for as long as possible to not go into voting, because of what can then be a backlash. But certainly, and also it's I would say if it's a contained problem, I'm sure you could have a voting around it. But if you're looking at very big fundamental issues, then going for voting won't probably solve it. And we see it now in many parts of our multilateral system, that they are with the sort of negotiating in good faith, rules-based order. There are countries that take a very different view on it now than what was the case for even 10 years ago, and somehow we will need to adapt to that, and that's why we also are now hearing about minilateralism, plurilateralism. Is it so that in order for us to move ahead with agendas, we sometimes need to come up with different kinds of groupings who then come together and agree on issues, because the multilateral situation is fraught at the moment.
Thank you very much. Bethany, skill set. We got a comment here from a suggestion from Thomas Backhaus. He says a very, very thick skin.
Definitely a thick skin and a willingness to lose sleep and chances to eat and to suffer from high levels of stress. So those are good skill sets.
That doesn't sound nice.
No, it's. I mean, I have my experiences are from the plastic space, which has been, from my understanding, a particularly contentious and aggressive environment. So yeah, thick skin. But for our scientists, some of the qualities that or training that Delian mentioned are also relevant. So we scientific expertise. Step number one, you get that through being a scientist. But the next part is a willingness to communicate science and to synthesize science together in interdisciplinary groups. So to sit down at the table with people who think different and have different knowledge sets, and to work through how you can combine that into a document, and to spend the time doing that. Then we understanding the political space and what a negotiation is, or what a science panel is, how that works, what kinds of questions are coming up, and what your role is there. So how and when and where can you feed into that process is something that you need to learn, and that's some sort of diplomacy training, which is a little bit available. We do some of that for our scientists through like preparatory meetings before we go to INCs, and we do have experts from civil society, policy experts come on board to give crash courses to our members. We also have media training, communications training, if people are going to be speaking publicly on behalf of the coalition. We have code of conduct policies, cultural sensitivity is important. We have training sessions in how to have a bilateral meeting with a country. Who should be at that meeting? How should you behave at that meeting? How should that meeting be organized? How do you have conversations there? Language sensitivities, words that can be potentially charged or problematic. Like navigating all of these things are conversations that we have before going to the meetings. And then for us, it's important to know that when countries get to the meetings and they're starting the negotiations, they have likely already formed their positions weeks before they arrive there. So even if it's important for us to have meetings in those spaces and on the fly answer questions or correct misunderstandings, it's probably even more important for us to talk to them 4 to 6 weeks before that at least. To say, these are the questions that are on the agenda, these are the issues that will be discussed, this is what the science says about question A, B, and C. They might have specific questions to us, we might be able to make them aware of something that isn't on the agenda but potentially would be important to consider. So it's understanding how the timing of things and how things move, and while avoiding being policy prescriptive, being policy relevant, so that you're bringing the science to them at the right time point, in the right focus. So these are all many different aspects of the kinds of work that we try to do.
Thank you, Bethany. I suppose this is quite different. The way you are working in this science coalition is different from being like one of the assessment report authors in IPCC or IPBES.
I just as a young person asking, I'm not sure if we got this from IPCC, but IPBES is a young fellows program, so they take part, but they're not kind of selected through the quota together with all the senior scientists, but there's a young fellows program that follows the assessments and do work in it, and so we are training young people to kind of get skill, and many of these then come back as ordinary kind of lead authors or CLAs even. So maybe that's a recommendation.
Chapter scientist program.
Come again?
We have a buddy system for our new members going to meetings so they can team up with a more senior, more experienced scientist. They can sort of show them the rope. What rooms can you go into or not? What seats can you sit on or not? All these kinds of how to behave in these spaces. So we have buddy systems too.
Okay, thank you. We have a few minutes left, so I would like to give each presenter an opportunity that during 45 seconds give us some hope, so that in 10 years we have expanded this space and there's more room for science, etc. What should scientists or science bodies do? Martin, please start.
I'm not sure. I mean, as scientists, we do, I guess, what we can. It would have been a question I had earlier to you, Daniel, who is we? Because we are the scientists, and I think we mostly agree on what's needed, what we want to share, and how we want to share it, and that's all there. So the problem is not, I think, with us, I would say. It's rather with the process. So my hope would be voting. Voting. Because I think the processes that we have seen and have learned from IPCC and IPBES have come to an end. We are in a totally different situation now. I talked to Marcus Oriana, the UN rapporteur on human rights and toxics, and he said the year 2025 was a landmark in the breakdown of the processes that we have had for the last decades. So this is really a turning point.
Very positive.
So that was Martin's message of hope. I'm going to say that while a lot of what he's saying is absolutely true, I'm finding that a lot of countries, especially those that don't have access to their own expert teams, are very receptive to the work that we're doing and are very grateful that we are there. So bringing science to these spaces is really essential, really crucial, especially as the United Nations does in all of its central mandates, treaties, conventions, call for lifting science to the highest levels, for evidence-based decision-making, for bringing science to protect people and the environment. And this is something that we're trying very hard to do, and I think in some small way at least succeeding. And as I said, the treaty fell apart. the petrostates, the spoilers, the blockers have definitely done a very good job. But a lot of countries rejected the bad treaty that was on the table at the end of the last negotiation. Speaking of long days, we were there from 8 in the morning till 10 in the morning the next day. And it was rejected on the grounds of it not aligning with evidence and science. And that's important. A bad treaty can be worse than no treaty at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Please,
and I will have to run after my little intervention here. To bring up something else then, and to echo what was said by Kerstin in his last PowerPoint is we need to work on the credibility or confidence in science and how to address complex issues. And my mission nowadays is how we need to talk to each other as scientists, to start already in academia, to increase our capacity to work interdisciplinary and understand each other to find the solutions. And I see small signs of that happening. I think those IPCC and your body, when I don't remember the name yet, surely brings people together. So that helps to make that, because I think that is one very important way of kind of making science more relevant, or making us together formulate how we address the problems and reach out to kind of general public and kind of cross this, go outside the walls of university and start with ourselves, then talking to each other.
Thank you, Marie. Over to Liang.
Thanks. I have two aspects. Number one is to be idealized, that I think we need to really have a really strong UN, because all the problem with the consensus, etc., is that we don't have a government, world government, or international government. So I know this is unrealistic. So then second aspect is that if we want to be realistic, I think we just keep fighting, because in the end we will be working. IPCC took many decades actually. So I think you guys, maybe IPBES is just follow the IPCC, others are just starting. So it will take time, but I think eventually we'll get there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then finally, Kerstin.
Thank you. I think we are, as I said, I think these are particularly harsh times when it comes to multilateralism, and I think we will get through them. I don't know whether this is hope, but I think what will happen is that for governments, for countries, through their citizens, it will become clear that cost of inaction is too high, which means that the assessments that we are doing on chemicals, on pollution, the toxic mix that is climate change and air pollution, what it does to the health of our citizens, what it does to reproduction and so on, will become increasingly apparent. And I think this will then turn us towards, again, a sense of solidarity and a sense of concern for humanity. But at the moment, I see that there is breakdown, and I do think that that's why it is so important to, despite it all, to keep at it. And I think what the scientific community, in highlighting where we're at, what are the problems, are absolutely crucial. And I think it's absolutely crucial that we keep integrity, we keep authority, and we keep credibility. And we try to communicate this to the people that are affected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerstin, and thanks to all the presenters and panelists. Excellent presentations, very insightful. Thanks to the online participants and to everyone here. And do stay on and have some healthy living buns, right? So with that, we'll close this webinar, and thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.